Chapter 10. Stray. Jack moved with the river's mild current, aware of nothing but the brilliant blue sky at which he was staring. He didn't know how long he'd been floating. He hadn't even realized that he was awake. The messenger bag around his neck became caught in an overgrowth of blackberries, and he came to a stop, fixating blankly on a vine just above his face. Jagged thorns formed a row along its edge, curved and pointed, just like teeth, like snarling, hungry teeth! He flailed his arms backward, spluttering to consciousness as he ingested a mouthful of water. His feet found the stone embankment, and he attempted to kick away, but the bag was hooked in the thorns, and the more he struggled, the more entangled he became. He tried taking it off, intending to leave it behind, but couldn't do so without going deeper into the bramble. Calm, he told himself. He drew in a breath, held it, and perked a long ear up. Hearing only the trickling movement of the water, he got to work untangling the bag. As he delicately unhooked the barbs, he took in his surroundings. Upstream, the river passed around a bend, both banks completely obscured by blackberries. In the distance stood a range of forest-covered mountains. They weren't familiar. He turned the other direction. About 50 feet downstream, a stone bridge arched over the water, ornamented with iron lanterns along its edge. If there was a bridge, there must be a road. Finally freeing the bag, he pushed off the sloping embankment. He wasn't much of a swimmer, but had no trouble keeping his face above the water as he bounced weightlessly below the refracted light dancing across the bridge's underbelly. There were brambles on the other side, but with a reasonably broad gap between them and the bridge. The bank was steeper than expected, but a few sturdy roots aided his climb, and he pulled himself onto the level earth alongside a gravel road, then collapsed into the dust. The urgency of escaping the river had washed all else from his mind. Now it came flooding back like a horribly vivid nightmare. Dr. Walraven was dead. There was no question about it. Even if the wolves hadn't finished him, the fire would have. He shook the thought and a spurt of water from his head and pushed himself to a sitting position. Unfastening the buckle of the messenger bag, he pulled out the package. It was nothing special. If anything, it was as plain a package as Jack had ever seen. Brown paper that looked like it had been cut from a paper bag, completely wrapped in tape, and addressed to... He wondered if the contents had been destroyed by the river, or whether the tape might have protected it. Then he decided he didn't care. He turned it over, mindlessly eyeing every side. Protecting this package had been Dr. Walraven's final act, but now, as Jack pondered its contents, he had to fight a desire to toss the wretchedly simple thing into the river. Instead, he began working at the tape. After a moment of uselessly scratching at it, however, he gave up and started scanning the ground for a suitably sharp rock or stick.
"Hey, boy!"
Jack dropped the package and spun around, ending up in a crawling position. Lost in his thoughts, he had not heard the approach of a large blue tractor. As he took in its enormity, it narrowly cleared both edges of the lantern-lined bridge. He marveled that he had not heard the loud, uneven banging of its engine. A broad-shouldered farmer was leaning out the window of a cab between the large rear wheels. His face was mostly hidden by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, but his long whiskers and thick muzzle identified him as some large breed of cat.
"You all right, son?"
His voice was deep, booming, and although he sounded kindly, his lips peeled over razor-sharp teeth as he spoke, and Jack was seized by an uncontrollable trembling. Nausea spread from his temples down to his stomach, and everything grew dim. A sudden jolt woke him. He was slumped sideways, his cheek pressed against glass. Too dazed to react, whether in alarm or otherwise, he sat slowly upright and turned his head lazily, observing his surroundings. He seemed to be in the cab of the big blue tractor. Through its windscreen he could see its boxy blue nose bouncing along a path that cut between oaks and evergreens. His clothes were still soggy, but had dried to some extent. By the fading light of the sky, it was setting on evening. Was that even possible? Blinking drearily, he turned his head to the left. The farmer was staring straight ahead, firmly gripping a large black steering wheel. He looked out the corner of his eye and gave a smile.
Ah, you're awake. How do you feel, boy?
Jack glanced away.
From the looks of things, you seem to have been swimming in the Brislin.
He laughed.
Bad idea, that. The Brislin looks slow, but it's got a mighty undercurrent. You want to be careful.
Jack's head bobbed with the movement of the tractor. He turned to look out the window. Here and there they passed homes so ornately trimmed they looked like gingerbread houses. "Where are we?" he asked in a flat tone.
Ah, he breaks the silence.
The heavy cat guffawed. There was warmth in his voice.
This,
he said,
is the beautiful town of Brislin, namesake of your river.
Jack felt a swell of relief. Brislin, he knew, was a great journey away from Haydensboro. Whatever danger still lurked there, it was behind him, hours behind him. But how had he come this far, and why had the cat taken him so far from where he had found him? This last question he voiced, hoping only later that it had not sounded rude. The cat laughed again, and then tipped his hat back slightly, though his face was still shaded.
Well, you did tell me you had to get to Treeark.
I did?
Several times, boy. Said you knew somebody there. If that's not the case, I can certainly take you back the other way, though we'd best find a place to stop for the night.
Jack watched the trees passing by. He did know somebody in Treeark, and now Alan Cale was the only family he had left. No, he found himself saying, I do need to go to Treeark.
Well then?
The farmer turned his head fully toward Jack for the first time.
We're headed the right way.
In the distance ahead, Jack could see a long row of high-standing lanterns lining the path. Just beyond, he saw a large building, brown with white trim, in that same gingerbread style. He was out of danger.